Welcome to Trifecta Collective, Finding the Root, where we dive deep into understanding and addressing root causes of chronic health issues so you can help and find healing inside and out, now and forever. Hello, and welcome to Trifecta Collective, Finding the Root. I'm Megan Abbott, owner and founder of the holistic health practice Trifecta Collective. Welcome to the podcast. So today is part 2 of the building optimal hormones or something along those lines. I can't quite remember what we decided to call this. And we're going to part 2 here today. And if you didn't listen to part 1, please go listen to part 1 first, as I'm going to pick up right where I left off. With part 1, we're going to start talking about nutrition and specific foods to support your hormones. And then we're going to dive into a couple other bigger segments along the lines of what do we need to do to support our body's optimal hormone levels, and how do we build out an optimal hormone pathways? How do we build up hormones? How do we eat for our hormones? How do we do all the other things that are so supportive for our optimal hormone levels? So for this first piece, I'm going to be specifically talking about nutrition. If you are driving or walking or something along those lines, you may want to save this episode and come back to it again once you have some time with like something to write down on, a pen and paper, or like notes on your phone, something along those lines, because I am going to go through all the nutrients we talked about last time. And I'm going to talk about foods specifically to eat to support our optimal hormone levels. And, when I was going through this list, and I am also going to talk about a couple other things kind of as we go food related when it comes to supporting, like when we get to drainage pathways, I'm going to talk about some nutritional support specifically there. I'm also going to talk a little bit more specifically around progesterone and foods to support progesterone levels. And you're going to see some trends here. And you're going to see a lot of foods in a lot of the same categories. And this is not by accident. And I'm going to bring a lot of this back kind of at the very end. And this is why nutrition is so important. And eating to fuel our bodies, especially as women, is foundational. And this is one of the biggest things that we do with our clients. And whether that's someone coming in who is eating kind of a standard American diet or barely eating, to kind of the opposite end, to overeating, to kind of somewhere in the middle of that, eating quote unquote super clean, super well. And a lot of times there is some room for improvements in all of these cases. And we want to make sure that we're eating enough, we're not eating too much, we're getting a lot of these really, really good nutrients. And once again, you're going to see a lot of these trends overlap as far as nutrients are concerned. And when we can say when we have aversions to certain foods, and I will say if you're a vegetarian, like specifically a vegetarian or vegan, there's a couple of foods I'm going to have consistently on the list for you guys, and it can be more challenging. And I'm not saying it's not possible. I have worked with plenty of women who are vegetarian, vegan, who eat to fuel their bodies and eat super well from a supportive standpoint, from a how do we get all the nutrients that we need. And it's a lot more challenging. And it's typically the people who are running their own labs every 3 to 6 months, who are staying really on top of supplements, who have some baseline knowledge going into this, who I see the most successful at this side of things. So because I'm just going to name it, there's going to be a lot of animal-based products that I'm going to talk about here. I did just want to note that yes, this is absolutely feasible, possible. I am not anti-vegetarian, anti-vegan, and for most people, I don't think it's the most supportive way to feed and fuel your body. Now, if there is a moral objection to eating animal-based products, that is different too. If you're eating vegan or vegetarian strictly for your health, I do often question that.
And it is up to you. It is your body, it is your choice, and you know your body best. And I like to have a conversation about it. And it's not an angry conversation. It is a, hey, just a heads up, are you aware of this? And what are you doing? What kind of baseline knowledge, what kind of baseline support are you doing for yourself to make sure that you're staying on top of nutrients that aren't quite as easy to get when you're not eating animal-based products? And the thyroid health and sex hormone health are the two kind of biggest things that I often see when it comes to people coming in vegetarian or vegan and or with a longer history of it who have since switched because they realized it wasn't the best for their body. And once again, not saying it can't be, and there's a lot of benefits of eating some animal-based products. So let's dive right into these foods. Okay, I'm going to be starting off with cholesterol, fatty acids, fats, omega-3s, omega-6s, your EPA, DHA, all of these things is what we're talking about here. So I'm going to run down my list, and then I'm also going to make a little bit of a side note here. So biggest things that are really supportive, and remember, cholesterol is the backbone to build all hormones. All hormones. These also play a huge role in modulating inflammation in the body. Super, super, super important. I never recommend a low fat diet, like a strict low fat diet. Lower fat, once again, as I talked about in the last episode, if you've got that one mark, that like LP little a, we may want to adjust your saturated fat intake, just your saturated fat intake, and this might look a little bit different. So common foods, and by the way, I did not go extensive list. I went kind of the top handful of foods for each category. At the top, let's see, what did I do? Almost, I mean, like 9, 8, 7 to 9 foods for each category almost. So cholesterol, eggs, beef, lamb, aka all of your red meat. Your good quality fats, grass-fed butter, ghee, extra virgin olive oil, avocado oil, coconut oil. Those are some of your really big ones. Duck fat, tallow. We get into some of these quality fats. And once again, I'm going to come back to this one here towards the end. Organ meats. Organ meats, super, super high in all kinds of great nutrients. Now, here's a little side note on organ meats. I like eating organ meats a handful of ounces a week. It is not super pleasant for most people to eat a lot of organ meats. That does not mean I recommend for the vast majority of people taking like a beef liver or an organ complex. If you're going to supplement with these, we need to keep a very close eye on your iron levels, and not just your ferritin, but your serum iron, your TIBC, total iron binding capacity, your iron saturation, and your ferritin, along with the CBC, your complete blood count. So we need to be looking at all of those if you're going to be supplementing with these organ meats. Full fat dairy. Full fat dairy, I would say full fat dairy and organ meats are two of the most nutrient dense foods that are out there. Sardines and other fatty fish like wild caught salmon. I will say salmon in general, ideally wild caught. I'm also going to say for all of these, yes, grass fed, grass finished, free range, all of that kind of stuff is the most ideal. And that is not possible for everyone for a variety of reasons, whether accessibility, financially, whatever it is. Do your best. Do your best. It's not about being perfect. Nuts. Nuts are really good. And this is pretty much all nuts really across the board. And then also a lot of seeds, I'll say especially flaxseed. You're going to see two seeds kind of come up pretty consistently, flaxseed and pumpkin seed. Another really good one is oysters. Oysters are also really good. They're also really great for zinc and copper. Okay, little side note here before I move on. So especially over the last few years, there's been a lot of controversy over seed oils. Are seed oils good? Are they bad? I will tell you, personal opinion, anything that is highly processed to make, I don't think is the greatest for our bodies. These kinds of seed oils are highly processed. Once again, that is my opinion based on all of the research that I've seen, based on what I know about biology, physiology, how all of the body works. But also the other big thing that I think about, and this applies directly to here, is we really want a quality omega-3 to 6 ratio. And there are omega-3s, 6s, 9s, and we can test for these things, by the way. And a lot of functional practitioners do. We will sometimes. We don't do it all the time. It can be pretty expensive. So, yeah, it can be valuable, and it's not the be all end all as a starting point for a lot of people. However, with most of these seed oils that are highly processed, so, we think about canola oil, vegetable oil, all of these kinds of oils, they are often very times high in omega 6s. Most of us get more than enough omega 6s. So this could be another reason to switch to some of these other higher quality oils, what I would deem higher quality oils that are going to be a little bit more balanced in their ratio. Some are going to be a little bit higher in omega 3s. They're going to have less of these omega 6s, which once again, like most of us get more than enough of omega 6s. So it's not only how can we increase omega 3s, but also where can we maybe decrease the omega 6s a little bit for these better ratios. Modifying, mitigating, eliminating seed oils can be a piece of that process. Okay, zinc is another really big one. Now, here's another reason why eating for your zinc can be more valuable than supplementing. So remember last time I talked about your zinc and copper ratio. Supplements, if you are supplementing with straight zinc, that can easily throw off your zinc to copper ratios. Now, when we find these nutrients in foods, they really come with a lot of their cofactors and in ratios that are most ideal for your body. It's one of the beautiful things about nature and eating kind of whole-based foods is that nature knows what our bodies need, and it's there. So oysters, really good, great zinc to copper ratio. Most red meat, especially beef and lamb, super good. Pumpkin seeds, dark meat for poultry. So if you think about like your chicken thighs, chicken legs, same thing with turkey and duck and other kind of poultry. Lentils and chickpeas can be really good for zinc. Now, here's the thing. There are some what we call phytonutrients in some of these like nuts and seeds and legumes and all that kind of other stuff. Definitely applies when it comes to lentils and chickpeas. And what this means is that it can make these nutrients a little less bioavailable, meaning that they're a little harder to be absorbed properly within our body. Soaking and or sprouting, depending on what food we're looking at, some are sprouted, some are soaked, kind of depends here, can really help mitigate that and make these nutrients more bioavailable, meaning that our body can absorb them better. So when you think about lentils, chickpeas, beans, certain seeds, like it can be really helpful to look into that process. And I'm not going to go super deep into that process. It's pretty easy. There's some really easy information if you just do a quick Google search here. So that can be really good. Cashews and then eggs. If you're paying attention, you'll notice there's quite a few overlaps already here. Now let's go into magnesium. Even more overlaps. Pumpkin seeds. Pumpkin seeds are really good for a lot of things. I actually just added them into, I usually do a salad for lunch in the summer for probably 4 or 5 days out of the week. And I recently added those back in and swapped them out for walnuts to get a good fat source, but also to really support my own hormones, among other things. So if we're looking at magnesium, we got pumpkin seeds, dark leafy greens, dark chocolate. And we're looking at specifically in that 70% cacao ratio or higher is going to be stuff you're higher in magnesium. By the way, a lot of women have chocolate cravings before their period. It's not a coincidence. Your body's not craving necessarily the sugar, it's craving the extra magnesium to help your body feel safer, to help your body feel calmer, to support progesterone, to support the drop in hormones before the rise in hormones right before our period. So not a coincidence. Our bodies are incredibly intelligent. Dark meat, let's see, magnesium. Okay, we've got dark chocolate. Avocado, really good source of fat too, by the way. Black beans, lentils, another common one coming up. Almonds, cashews, specifically almonds and cashews. And then salmon. Once again, these fatty fishes are coming up quite a bit. B vitamins, organ meats, eggs, pretty much all meat overall. Organ meats are going to be particularly high in your B vitamins, among many other things. Full fat dairy, potatoes, including sweet potatoes, fish, almost all fish for reference, clams, oysters, sardines, salmon, tuna. You're going to see salmon and sardines come up quite a bit too here. Oysters have come up quite a few times here. With the tuna I think is safe. Good quality tuna is safe. Now, would I eat it every day? Probably not. As someone who used to eat it every day and did have some high mercury levels, that wasn't the only thing that was playing a role. I did also have amalgam fillings here, which was definitely playing a role. But tuna is very good, and you can even mix in cod livers, like straight up cod livers are also really nutrient dense, along with the sardines. If you don't like the taste of those, which I do not blame you, you can take a few of those. If you make like a homemade little tuna salad, you can make that with and put a little bit of sardines in there, some cod livers in there. You can add some like homemade mayo or some avocado oil or olive oil, like a good quality type of mayo in there. Mix it all up. I will often use avocado instead of mayo. I'm not a huge mayo person, but I do really like avocado, and I like adding in the extra fat in there. I think adding a little pinch of salt in there, it tastes really good. Sometimes I'll put a little squirt of lemon over top of that too for some extra potassium in there. And it can be really, really tasty. So it can be a sneaky way to get in a few of these foods. And then black beans and lentils again. So once again, there are non-animal-based products in here. You're typically just going to need more of them, and the soaking and sprouting can go a really long way with these. Iron, organ meat. So once again, now please keep in mind we need to keep an eye on iron levels. Too much and too little can cause very similar issues for reference. Red meat, oyster, clams, sardines, pumpkin seeds, lentils, chickpeas. So a lot of overlap here. And then iodine and selenium. So for iodine, you're typically going to get that from like the ocean sea-based plants. So seaweed in particular, really good. You'll see it like there was a big thing around sea moss a while ago. Now be careful in supplementing with too much iodine, especially if you have not checked your iodine levels. If a lot of women have thyroid dysfunction, iodine can help some women, can also hurt some women depending on what is actually going on with your thyroid. So you can eat these things, but don't over supplement or don't over, it's pretty hard to overeat seaweed, but you don't want to overeat some of these things either, because that can also cause some issues depending on the person. Everything is very individualized. This is why we are not great at giving blanket recommendations, and there's so much nuance with all of this. So seaweed, whitefish, super good. Shrimp, eggs. Eggs is coming up a lot. Selenium, Brazil nuts, sardines, tuna, most of your meats, eggs. There's a reason why we focus on protein and talk about protein so much. And by the way, it's going to come up a few other times here on the rest of this episode. So we're not making this up. We're not just saying meat's super important. Just eat all the meat, eat all the protein, 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 protein. It's because it's so highly under-eaten, and it's so important for so many things. And once again, there's going to be two big pieces that I'm going to continue to talk about here that are also really, really valuable. Couple of other things from a nutritional perspective. When it comes to progesterone, vitamin C rich foods can also go a long way in supporting optimal progesterone levels. So this might be things like bell peppers, kiwi, citrus. If we think of, oranges and lemons and limes and grapefruit and different things like that. Berries, also super good for vitamin C. And once again, I should be supplement with vitamin C. Depends on the person. I will tell you by and large, if you can eat some of these things, it's super good. It's always going to be better to eat versus just blindly supplementing for a lot of these things. Now, that doesn't mean supplements don't have a time and a place, because of course they do. And the more we can do from a food-based first approach, I think the better. And once again, it's not about being perfect. It's about how can we consistently get some of these things into our diet. And listen, like, not everyone does well with eggs. Not everyone does well with dairy. So not everyone does well with red meat. Although I think I've seen a lot of people get there depending on the issue. Lyme is a big reason. Low stomach acid production is another one. So those are some other things we may want to look at if you have an aversion to red meat or your body doesn't do well with red meat. Okay, so I'm going to, once again, little sprinkles of nutrition kind of based in here, but I want to talk about 3 other pieces that also play a really big role in building optimal hormone levels. The next one here, gut health. If you have ever worked with us and we have been looking at hormone levels, we also typically don't start with hormones. So the gut health is going to be a big piece of this. And we're going to take a very close look at your gut health. And if you have gut symptoms, if you have signs on your labs of gut overgrowth issues, of gut health issues, we're typically going to start here and some other places versus directly just looking at hormone levels, because your gut does play such a big role in supporting optimal hormone levels. So when we look at this, when we look at gut health and how does gut health play such a big role in hormones, in building hormones, in metabolizing and using all of our hormones, what role does this actually play? So the biggest piece that gut health plays is with our estrogen levels. And our gut health plays a huge, huge, huge role in how we process, recirculate, and eliminate estrogen. And I'll also say our bile, which is produced in our liver, which is what we're going to talk about after this, also plays a really big role in this. So when we think about estrogen, so when we have estrogen in our bodies, estrogen, any excess estrogen or estrogen that is not being used or estrogen that's ready to be eliminated, that'll take place in our liver. And then our liver uses bile to send bile to our gut to send the signal to eliminate the excess estrogen. If it doesn't get put into the waste and then is eliminated outside of our bodies, usually via stool, then it is recirculated. This can present as estrogen dominance and or poor estrogen quality, because it was actually meant to be eliminated outside of our bodies, not put back in circulation. This is where constipation can play a really big role. And constipation, we have constipation. This is a really big deal because this is our body saying, hey, we have this waste and we have these waste products, whether that's toxins, hormones, viruses, all kinds of other things that our body's like, we don't need this. Let's push these out. We don't want them. We don't need them. Let's push them out. But then for some reason, our body's not pushing that out. And ideally, we want to be pushing that out at least once a day, if not a few times a day. I'd say 2 to 3 is the most optimal, and to feel fully and completely empty when it comes to bowel movement. This is why we talk about this quite a bit. So if someone is constipated, not only are they going to reabsorb some of those toxins and other waste products, but estrogen is also going to be then recirculated throughout our bodies. And once again, this can be presented as estrogen dominance, quote unquote estrogen dominance, when it's not really our body's producing too much estrogen. It's just not eliminating what it doesn't want and or need anymore. And that's a big deal. And that's a huge deal when we think about overall hormone health. And especially depending on the symptoms that someone's physically experienced, not only from a hormone perspective, but from other related kind of issues, we really need to look at this. Gut overgrowth can also play a big role in this. If you have gut overgrowth issues, whether that's bacteria, yeast, fungus, and or parasites, that can also really disrupt this whole process and cause a lot of issues, whether that's nutrient deficiencies, whether that's constipation, the lack of absorption of some of these nutrients that our body needs, the recirculation of the estrogen. A lot of issues can kind of come up here. The gut also produces about 90 to 95% of the body's serotonin levels. Serotonin is a neurotransmitter. It's one of the things that keeps us happy and sane and our mood stable and a bunch of other things. So if we have issues like depression, anxiety, also hormone kind of issues, especially in our luteal phase, things like PMDD, things like you get really emotional, you get really irritable. All the emotional side of things, your brain kind of just like feels like it stops working. The gut can be a very big component of this. And we absolutely want to take a deeper look at the gut, what is going on. And I'll also say before, we don't prescribe HRT for anyone. It is also a very personal decision. We can absolutely have conversations about it. We can chat about it. We're working on getting someone really good, which is harder than it sounds to find, to come on the podcast to chat more about HRT. We do want to look at the gut. And if a practitioner is willing to prescribe and dig into HRT without first looking at the gut, and I'll even say drainage pathways, that's a huge red flag to me. Because if the body can't process these hormones appropriately, and then we just give the body more hormones, it can be a disaster. And you can end up feeling even worse than you did before the HRT, and it's not great. So these are all things we want to look at. The other thing is what we call intestinal permeability, or quote unquote leaky gut. Leaky gut is when we look at the small intestine, when we look at digestion, all of our food should be broken down before it gets to the small intestine. And then in the small intestine, what happens is basically our nutrients are absorbed into our bloodstream, and then waste products are sent further down to be eliminated. However, what happens, and this can happen for a variety of reasons. Our small intestine, our junctions, which is almost like a fence. And if you're watching this is the example I always love to give. So we have these like fences in our small intestine, and the holes are only big enough to allow nutrients to go through them. Shouldn't allow food particles, shouldn't allow anything else. But for a variety of reasons, these kind of holes, these fence holes, can start to get bigger and start to loosen and start to allow other things to float out into our bloodstream, such as food particles. This is where food sensitivities come into play, because these food particles shouldn't actually be in our bloodstream. And so our immune system deems them as enemies and starts to attack them. And so when you eat a food, it's not that the food is bad. It's that your small intestine is now allowing food particles. One, the food's probably not properly digested before it gets to the small intestine. And then we have these looser junctions in the small intestine, which allow these food particles to go out into our bloodstream. And then our immune system sees them as enemies and starts to attack them. Not good. None of this is good. This is also why we don't do food sensitivity testing, because we don't do food sensitivity testing because that's not the real problem. It's the immune system reaction, but we need to take a couple steps back. Okay, but why and how did this happen in the first place? Usually gut overgrowths are involved. Usually upper GI issues are also involved, whether that's stomach acid, pancreatic enzymes, bile flow, bile quality, all that kind of stuff. Certainly eating a lot of inflammatory foods does not help either. A lot of processed foods, all that kind of stuff. So that'll drive overall not only gut inflammation, but systemic inflammation. Puts an extra burden on the liver. It dysregulates the immune system, which can then directly impair hormone signaling from a cellular receptive standpoint. So not only do we have issues with the processing of certain hormones, especially estrogen, But then we can have absorption issues directly at the cellular receptive kind of level, which can cause increased issues. So this is why we really need to take a deeper look at gut health. And before we do any direct support from a hormone perspective, we want to take a deeper look at the hormones, hormone levels, what the gut is doing, how the gut is working from a digestive standpoint, but also an inflammatory standpoint, from an immune system standpoint, because all of that is going to play a really big role in how your body is processing and using, clearing, eliminating all of these things when it comes to our hormone levels. So super, super, super important. Okay, next one here. And once again, this is another really big one. Drainage pathways / the liver. This is really big when it comes to all hormones, especially estrogen. We could also really even say testosterone, but I would say estrogen first and foremost. Second that with testosterone. Testosterone / androgens. If you have PCOS, PMOS, definitely this applies to you. If you have the darker hairs that pop up, the darker body hairs, whether that's on your chin, on your face, on your lip, this might be on nipples, on the belly, kind of on that like little happy trail, all of that. This is particularly important here too. So let's talk about estrogen here first. So when we look at estrogen, we have estrogen metabolism. Just like we have these 3 phases of detoxification that I kind of mentioned last time. And our body goes through these phases of detoxification. Naturally, it does it all the time. It does it every day to process things out that our body doesn't want or need to be eliminated through, whether that's through urine, through stool, through sweat. And those are our 3 major pathways. We're also going to talk about a little bit more about our lymphatic system when we talk about this here too. But when we talk about estrogen, estrogen specifically goes through, and we want to look a little bit closer at both phase 1 and phase 2 of estrogen metabolism. And this is where something like the functional testing of hormones with like a Dutch test can really, really be helpful in understanding the bigger picture of the hormone health. Once again, if someone has estrogen related issues, whether that's from a symptom perspective and or from maybe we've seen that on blood tests or they're in perimenopause, postmenopausal, different things like that, this side of things is particularly important. And it's really hard to look at through anything other than functional testing because traditional Western medicine, while they have barely any knowledge on hormones themselves, how these hormones are actually processed and used within our body, you're talking huge discrepancies here. And this is where the functional, holistic side of things, not only do we look at hormone levels, but we look at the full processing of these hormones, how the body's actually being able to use these and use them effectively and or get out these things that our body doesn't want and or need. So when we look at phase 1, we have 3 major pathways our estrogen can take. And there is one most favorable pathway. And I'm not going to do like deep dives into this test because I have done it on other podcast episodes, but just to give you a basic kind of broad overview of this. So we've got phase 1, we've got this one most favorable pathway. We've got a middle ground that's not quite as favorable. It's not super dangerous, but it's definitely not as favorable. And then we do have an unfavorable pathway that has been shown to trigger unfavorable genes to turn on. When we think about epigenetics, genes can turn on and off given the right conditions. If our estrogen is favoring this unfavorable pathway, this phase 1, it can trigger unfavorable things. Big picture, it has been shown to trigger certain types of cancers. And if you listen back to the episode with Heather Cohen on cancer, we talk a little bit about this. And this is once again where especially if we have estrogen-driven cancers, if there is a family history of estrogen-driven cancers, this is a really important pathway to take a look at. I mean, I'll also say this is an important pathway to take a look at for everyone, and particularly those with a family history, because you may have been born with some of those same genes turned on, in which case, because of a variety of circumstances, in which case we can shift that. There are a lot of tools that we can use to shift and change that. And when we look at phase one, how do we support this specifically through a nutritional standpoint? Things like cruciferous veggies, things like red grapes, peanuts, green tea, black tea, garlic, seafood are some big ones that are very supportive of phase one estrogen metabolism. So this can go a really long way in just supporting proper nutrition and eating some extra maybe of these foods, or making sure we do consistently have some of these foods that we're eating on a regular basis. And that can go a really long way. Now, we also have phase two for estrogen metabolism. And this really goes back to phase two helps to package things up for elimination. Once again, specifically, I think about estrogen and excess testosterone and or androgens when it looks like this. So this is really where the quality of our bile plays a really big role. Things to think about that can really disrupt our bile. High toxin load, whether that's from mycotoxins, which is mold, heavy metal toxicity, and that could be exposure and or just overloading our system and it not being able to keep up. High levels of stress. Once again, this is the part where our body is packaging up things for elimination. If we have high levels of stress, that means more cortisol. That means more cortisol for our liver specifically to package up to eliminate. Big piece here. Low fat diet. A lot of fats are required to have really good quality bile production. So bile is produced in our liver, then stored in our gallbladder. And then when we eat fat, which should be happening every single day because it's a required nutrient, then our gallbladder releases fat to break down that fat. And then the bile does a variety. The bile does a lot of things for our body, including the elimination, where it's sending these things into our gut to be eliminated. So this is a really, really big piece. This also requires a lot of nutrients, a lot of different things. And we talk a lot about phase two detoxification. That being said, if you don't have a gallbladder, this is a really big one too. And this is where we have to be on daily support for your bile, because your bile is doing a whole bunch of other things other than just digesting fat. And that's also a really big job. So this is where ox bile and some other support is required for the rest of your life if you get your gallbladder out. Some people are a little willy-nilly in how they take out a gallbladder, and there are real and emergent situations where it is needed. That being said, either way, if you don't have a gallbladder, it's super important that you support your bile flow, bile production. Ox bile is a really, really good one. There's a product from Biotics called Beta Plus that we often recommend for our clients with no gallbladder. Another one that is good for not only the bile, but also a variety of other things, including all phases of detoxification, is TEDCA, TUDCA. Excuse me. Cellcore has one of our favorites, and we have compared this with 3 other brands, and it has consistently proven to be the best. So we do prefer that one. And I'll say Body Bio, BODYBIO, has our second favorite option in there. So if you don't have access to Cellcore, that Body Bio one can be a good secondary option here. So this phase 2 is super, super, super important. So things that can help support phase 2 detoxification: B vitamins, Magnesium. I already went through these foods, so I'm not going to list them again. Like I said, TEDCA can be really good. From a food perspective, like the leafy greens, eggs, liver, legumes. Also, sulfur-rich foods are also really, really, really good. So that's like broccoli, Brussels sprouts, garlic, onions, eggs, poultry, fish, cauliflower, cabbage, kale, arugula, radishes. These are all really, really big ones. Supporting sleep, supporting stress, limiting alcohol can go a super long way. Alcohol also directly competes with estrogen clearance. I'm going to say that again. Alcohol directly competes with estrogen clearance. This is not a don't drink alcohol, never drink alcohol. Alcohol is the enemy. It is not. And it can have very real consequences. So, watching how much you're drinking. I would also say your intention around drinking. Is alcohol your main coping mechanism? If so, that's also dangerous in a variety of other ways. And we want to look at some of those and maybe come up with some other tools to help you cope and process stress, help you relax. There are a variety of other things that we can do. And I maybe just think about some of those things here. And if you're having a drink here and there and it's social and it's, part of a gathering, drink your drink. It's okay. Just watch how much and for what reasons. Excess sugar and processed foods play a really big role in our liver. If you've ever heard of non-alcoholic fatty liver, it's actually it's not alcohol induced. And a lot of people have fatty liver and it has nothing to do with alcohol. It mostly has a lot to do with the excess sugar and processed foods. Toxin load can also play a really big role here. We've worked with a lot of clients with non-alcoholic fatty liver. Toxin load is almost always playing a role here, and we have seen a complete reversal in liver enzymes. And we've seen some pretty significant cases and seen some really incredible results with a lot of those individuals, which is always amazing to see. So things to think about. Stress, toxin load, medication, supplements, birth control, parasite overgrowth issues. Like all of these things can also play a role in our drainage pathways, specifically phase 1 and phase 2 of this detoxification. So those are all things that if you have if you're taking a lot of medications, you're taking a lot of supplements, it's a big burden on your liver. So if someone comes in having worked with another practitioner and they're on a bunch of supplements, one of the first things we're going to try and do is pull that list back and really what is actually needed? What does this person need to be on? What is most beneficial versus, do we have to stay on all of this? Can we really, because it's such a big stressor on the liver, on these drainage pathways, and that's not ideal, especially if we are going to do gut work, especially if there are toxin overload issues. We want to try and put the least amount of pressure on the liver as we absolutely can. So couple other things we want to look at from a drainage pathway standpoint, the lymphatic system. And the lymphatic system, we really need to be moving for the lymphatic system to be working best that it absolutely can. So when we look at this, gentle movement, walking can be good. A little bit of rebounding, a little bit of bouncing up and down can go a really long way when we look at that. And this, when the lymphatic system is not working appropriately, we think of the accumulation of what we call metabolic waste, which can include hormones. So, and a lot of people, if they carry a lot of excess estrogen specifically, and we'll typically see this kind of in a thick hips, thighs, and butts kind of area, we may see excess things like excess fat kind of there, a lot of, just like excess fat storage, a lot of cellulite type of issues. This is commonly a lymphatic kind of issue, and there's excess estrogen from our lymphatic system that's not being moved appropriately. And supporting our lymphatic system, whether that's through rebounding, whether that's through dry brushing, different things like that, just gentle movement, this can be really, really, really helpful. bowels. Once again, we already talked about hormones and bowels and how we look at this. So, and the elimination process is really, really important. So this can go a really long way too. And we want to make sure that we're appropriately pushing waste out of our bodies here. Kidneys. Kidneys are also really important. That's how water soluble based hormones leave our body. So making sure we're drinking water, we're having electrolytes so our body can absorb that, just optimal kidney function is going on here. Really, really important. Once again, bile and gallbladder, we want to make sure those are in a really good spot. And then our skin. Our skin is arguably our largest organ in our body and pushes out a lot, can also absorb a lot. This is where, especially if we look at our products, what kind of products are we using on our skin, on our face, makeup, sunscreen, all that kind of stuff? If there's high levels of toxins in any of that, I mean, we're absorbing all of that. And then our body has to metabolize it and push it out. And it can be challenging. It can be a lot. So these are things that we all need to think about. Okay. Other things to support drainage pathways, just kind of overall, castor oil packs can be awesome, especially if you have hormone imbalances. Man, I'll tell you, one of the biggest things that we will often do for a lot of women when they first come in is drainage pathway support work. And that'll often include a liver supporting activity, castor oil packs being a common one that we will use. This alone, cramps, some of the mood stuff, any like if you get constipated before your period, if you get the period poops, this can go a really long way and it's very, very, very gentle as long as you start out appropriately. Don't start off every day overnight. Too much for most people. Start with about 5 to 15 minutes as a starting point, and then you can ramp up from there. Okay, last piece I really want to talk about here is blood sugar regulation. This is another really crucial component when it comes to hormone health. And we talk about this a lot commonly with PCOS, PMOS, and regulating blood sugar. This is also really important as we get into perimenopause because the reduction and or fluctuation in hormones can exacerbate this. And blood sugar dysregulation is extremely, extremely stressful on the body. And this is one of the foundational components we do with all of our clients, whether they actively are aware of this or not. We will often start from a nutritional perspective when we talk about this. So why is this so stressful on the body? Well, when we get a blood sugar crash, that can lead most commonly to a cortisol spike. It's a defense mechanism within our body. It is something that naturally happens. We get this, our blood sugar tanks, and then our cortisol is going to naturally spike to help with it. And it's just something our body naturally does, and our body does not like this. And once again, if we get that cortisol spike, then that's an extra layer of stress. That's an extra thing for our drainage pathways to process out, all of that kind of stuff. Insulin, if we go towards, now, once again, blood sugar, it can look a lot of different ways. Insulin resistance is one of those things. It is not the only issue when it can come to blood sugar regulation. It's probably the one that people are most commonly associated with this. But insulin resistance specifically can elevate androgens and or testosterone, which is why this commonly comes with PCOS, PMOS. The other thing it can really do is elevate sex hormone binding globulin. And the way I like to talk about sex hormone binding globulin is it literally helps to bind up hormones. And when it's in a good spot, it's doing enough, but also not too much. If it's low, it's not doing enough. If it's high, it's doing too much. Insulin resistance specifically can elevate sex hormone binding globulin, meaning that now our body is binding up hormones at a higher rate and doing more of that than it's really supposed to, which can then trigger a decrease in actual bioavailable hormones. So hormones that our body's able to use. Not good. It is not good. So we do not want that. And then if blood sugar dysregulation, not just insulin resistance, but overall blood sugar dysregulation is bad enough, it can impair ovulation, which then means that your body's not going to be producing enough progesterone because ovulation is triggering the production of progesterone. Super, super, super important here. Blood sugar dysregulation can also disrupt sleep and can then further exacerbate HPA axis dysregulation, cortisol issues, all of that kind of stuff, increased stress. We know that sleep is a backbone and building block of hormones themselves. So we can have all of these kinds of issues too. So how do we regulate blood sugar regulation? So protein plays a really big role. So does fiber. Most people don't get enough of either. We typically start with the protein because it's so important for so many other things too, that, all right, let's start by eating protein and fat rich breakfast within about an hour of waking up ideally. Goes a long way, not only in regulating blood sugar that morning, but also the entirety of the rest of the day. Super, super, super important. Breakfast is so important for women. So this plays a big role. And then every time you eat, having some sort of protein can really help to stabilize blood sugar. If you're eating just carbs on an empty stomach, very challenging. It can be very, very challenging to regulate blood sugar. Now, a lot of times for our clients, we have seen directly from a clinical perspective, for the most part, better results when people eat protein than fiber, and then any other carbs. Make sure you're getting fat in there. For some people, though, and the research is pretty good on both sides for reference, and I know there's a whole book on eating your fiber first, but some people do better eating fiber than protein. If you have some blood sugar issues, try both. Another thing that will dysregulate blood sugar, though, is mold toxicity or mycotoxin illness. You could be eating perfectly and you can still have blood sugar issues. So if you are still having some blood sugar issues and you're like, Megan, I have looked so thoroughly at my nutrition. My nutrition is so good, so on point. I ate so much protein, so much fiber. All of these things look so good, and I'm still having issues, and your labs are still showing issues. We might want to look at mycotoxin issues to see if that is playing a role. I'm not saying it's guaranteed to play a role, and it could be playing a role here. So we really want to take a look at this. So those are really big things when it comes to building hormones, and hopefully over the last 2-ish hours, you have learned a lot in how to support hormones, and especially supporting hormones from a baseline up kind of standpoint, which is the real goal of this. There's so many basic things that we can do to support our hormone production, use of the hormones, filtering out excess hormones, all of that kind of stuff. And hopefully this is a really good overview to help you start to put a lot of these pieces and start to implement a lot of the foundational side of things, that if you are still having issues after the foundational side, we do want to take a deeper look. We do want to look at some other things that are going on. And as always, we offer free 30-minute consultations. They're completely free. And there's always a link down in the show notes or the caption, depending on where you're listening and or watching. And we will look through your labs. We'll talk through symptoms. We'll talk through health history to see what else might be going on, or to see what else is going on. And even if you haven't started making a lot of these changes, we can do that together. And we do a lot of this kind of work with a lot of women that we work with. So we're always here if you need us. Thank you for listening. As always, please like, subscribe, follow. If it resonates, 5-star reviews really, really, really mean the world to us. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time.